Hey, friends. Welcome to the Divorce Clarity Studio on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network Radio, podcasts, and TV. This podcast is for you if you're navigating divorce and feeling overwhelmed, confused, or painfully alone. I'm Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching. On this show, I offer clear information, grounded education, and soul centered guidance to help you understand the divorce process from start to finish without shame, fear, or overwhelm. Each episode, I sit down with a trusted and relatable expert across the divorce landscape, be it legal, financial, emotional, or relational. We gently demystify what's happening in your life, answer the questions you may be holding quietly, and support you in making decisions from clarity rather than crisis. The Divorce Clarity Studio is here to help you feel less alone, more informed, and more grounded and aligned with your values. This way, you can move through your divorce with intention and care and begin to imagine what's next. Today, I am so excited to welcome author and speaker Heather Sweeney into the studio. She brings expertise, warmth, and humanity to this conversation, and I trust you'll feel that as we speak. Heather has her own unique divorce story. She's a former military wife who lost and then found her identity through her tumultuous divorce process. I love the power of her experience. Uprooting and traveling is a significant part of Army life, and Heather shares that in a real way. She became an undercover blogger and then shared her name in a way that was first uncomfortable and then empowering. The process enabled her to truly find her soul. Most recently, she is the author of the book Camouflage: How I Emerged from the Shadows of a Military Marriage. And that's what she's here to talk about. Beyond the book, she writes about divorce, life as a military spouse, parenting, and women's health in an ever-expanding number of publications, from the New York Times and the Washington Post to Good Housekeeping, Reader's Digest, and the blog military.com, among many others. The list is constantly expanding. She lives in Virginia with her boyfriend, her 2 college-age kids, and her dog. Heather, welcome to the Divorce Clarity Studio.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I'm so thrilled to have you. I want to let you and our audience know that I read Camouflage and I couldn't put it down. There were so many moments that related to me that were resonant with my own divorce, and also so much of your life that is particularly unique to being a military wife. So I'd love you to share a snapshot of your story for our audience.
Absolutely. Yes. So when I was 23 years old, I got engaged to a wonderful person, and I was so excited and hopeful. And shortly before we got married, he came home one day and said, "I want to join the military." At the time, I don't think either of us had any idea what we were getting into, what we were facing, all of the hardships that come with military life. But we jumped right into it, and we got stationed in Pensacola, Florida. And I went back and got a graduate degree, and we had a baby. And things started getting a little difficult. About 6 months after we had our first child, he got deployed to Iraq for 6 months.
Mm.
And shortly after he got back from that deployment, safe and sound, we moved overseas to Japan. And things were getting a little bit rocky in our marriage. And I wasn't quite sure, well, is it military life? Is it us? Is it just we're growing apart? What is this? But we really didn't have a whole lot of time to analyze what was going on in our marriage. And we couldn't really seek therapy because in Japan it was a very small base. And the people who could offer us some help, we actually socialized with. So that would have been a little unethical. And then we had a second child overseas. And shortly before we moved back here to the States in Virginia, my husband told me that he wasn't happy and he wanted a divorce. And I thought that, that's huge news. And I was a little bit blindsided. However, my initial reaction wasn't, oh my gosh, how do I live without this person? I'm so heartbroken. My initial thought was logistics. Where am I going to live? How am I going to support myself financially? Where am I going to find childcare? All of these things. I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. And that was a real eye opener for me because I thought, well, shouldn't I be devastated? Shouldn't I be like begging him to stay because I love him so much? But it was because I was so unhappy as well. But we moved back to the States. We tried to make things work, and things were going well for a while. But he just kept traveling. There were more Middle East deployments, and we just couldn't get on the same page. Finally, we did go to counseling. In fact, over the span of about a year, we saw three different marriage
Mm.
counselors, and I just got to a point where I couldn't live like that anymore. But in the meantime, I had gotten a job as a teacher, and when he went on a deployment, I decided to start a blog. And so I was blogging about my military life and just the hardships of what we go through, especially when our service members are gone. And it got pretty popular, and I got offered a job. And once I got this job, it kind of occurred to me, well, the biggest fear I had about life on the other side of divorce was the financial aspect of it. How was I going to support myself? Getting this job really took that out of the equation because I was making my own money. And yeah, so we ended up pursuing divorce, and I ended up writing a book about it. So
So,
yeah, that's
well, that is a shortened version, but there's so much power in the story. So I want to go back to the beginning. You were really young
I
when
was.
you met him, and um, if I remember the book correctly, the story correctly, it was only a month or a few weeks before your wedding that he shared that he wanted to go into the military.
It was a few months before,
Okay. Okay.
but it was like a month after we got married that he actually did join the military. Like,
Yeah.
it happened pretty quickly.
Yeah. So that sort of must have shifted your whole perspective and your idea of marriage and this concept that for better or for worse, even when there are deals that you thought you made that are no longer part of the story, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, I think that we all go through that. Like we think that we have one expectation when we go in, and maybe it's fairy tale, or maybe we know, but we think that we're on the same trajectory. And when someone makes an announcement that seems unilateral or was unilateral, it sort of shifts our the ground underneath our feet because we're not sure where we stand. And that's really what it was.
Absolutely. And I think for me, again, being so young, I wanted to be a teacher. And as we all know, teachers don't make a lot of money. And so all of his ideas that he wanted for a career were always going to be, he was always going to be the breadwinner. He was always going to make a lot more money than I would. And I kept thinking to myself, okay, if he's passionate about this, I want him to find his passion in life. And if he's going to be the breadwinner, I want him to enjoy what he's doing while he is making the money. And as a teacher, I figured, well, I know we're going to move a lot. I can teach wherever we go.
Yeah.
There are always going to be schools. And so I think that's why I was so willing to really jump into it. And we also had a real whirlwind romance. We had been dating for only 9 months when we moved in together. We'd only been dating, no, we were 3 months when we moved in, 9 months when we got engaged. And
Wow.
so it was very quick. It was very romantic. And my daughter actually has since told me this term, love bombing. I didn't know that term back then. I don't think it existed. But that, looking back, that's really what it was. It was love bombing. And I was overwhelmed with passion and all of these
Yeah.
exciting hopes and dreams. And so I said, let's just go for it.
Yeah, but love bombing was the romance that we all grew up with. It resonated with us, right? That was every rom-com, there was love bombing, and that was the ideal. So when we were growing up, that was the story that we thought was the fairy tale. And so, I look back and I can think the same thing about my married relationship and the relationship that happened next, which was very much love bombing. And I was very immersed for 4.5 years until it all, when in the middle of those 4.5 years, it dramatically changed. So what I know is that, we learn as we grow. And so how do we assert our identity? And identity is a big piece of what we're talking about here. So one thing, if I can shift a little bit,
Yeah.
one thing that really struck me was that when you did start working, you weren't allowed to use your married name. And you handled that initially by writing under a pseudonym. And then you had an interview with, I think it was the New York Times, and they needed a name. And that became an issue. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So when I first started blogging, my husband had asked me to blog anonymously, which wasn't a big deal. I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was just like, okay, whatever. My blog was called Riding the Roller Coaster, and so when I made social media accounts, they were always roller, first name, last name, coaster, which seems so silly now. But the more popular the blog got, and the more I started going to conferences and showing up for live events, it just seemed so silly to me. And I kept saying to him, I really don't want to write under this name, this silly name anymore. And also at one of the conferences I went to, I did end up having a conversation with a New York Times editor who was writing a piece on military bloggers. And he did use my pseudonym in his interview, but he invited me to write for him. And so I wrote this whole essay for him. And I mean, talk about kicking a door open, writing for the New York
Mm.
Times. That's just about every writer's dream. And so I had written the piece. We went through several rounds of edits. And then he said, oh, by the way, you can't write this as roller coaster. We need a name. And so my husband and I kind of went back and forth. And I just said, I really like, why can't I write as my married name? And he never really gave me an answer. I'm not quite sure if it was just him saying that's what he wanted. He kind of used it under the guise of, I want to protect our privacy. In the military, there's something called OPSEC, it's Operation Security, where you're not really, he just really wanted to protect our family and his military career. So we kind of landed on, well, I'll just write under my maiden name, which I wasn't thrilled about because I couldn't connect it to my blog. He said, well, just don't connect it to the blog. And so I couldn't share. I wrote this New York Times essay and I couldn't share it anywhere. I told a couple of people and the editor was thrilled. And I wrote for him again 2 more times. But it was very disappointing for me where I wanted to be proud of my name and proud of my byline. And I was kind of hiding behind it. And it was very frustrating for me at the time.
I'm sure. And that like resonates for me with your title, Camouflage. Like you were hidden under the camouflage and it didn't resonate for you. It felt like you were hiding and you finally wanted to not hide. You finally were ready to be seen and to be heard. And so this was a really challenging moment. And correct me if I have this a little off, but like in terms of timing of your divorce story, at this point, there had been several conversations about divorce. That sort of, you were back in the States after Japan, and now you needed to have an identity. So how did that sort of play into this identity shift?
I think it was very gradual and it really was, just little stepping stones. So the blog led me to my full-time job, and even my coworkers didn't know what my married name was, because they called me by my maiden name. And so I just kind of rolled with that, and I was doing more freelancing. And I kept thinking to myself, the irony of all this, I finally have a voice. I'm finally writing. People are finally like listening and interested in what I have to say instead of, going to a party and everybody saying, well, what does your husband do? It was, wow, I love that piece you wrote for the New York Times. And so when it came time to get the divorce, I don't know if we're fast forwarding too much here, but he had asked me, you're not going to go back to your maiden name, are you? And I said, well, of course I am. You started this. I'm going to finish it, where all of my bylines were under my maiden name. I didn't have a single byline, if all those years of writing, as my married name. And it just kind of worked out for me where I really liked who I was as Heather Sweeney, before I got married. And it was really cool for me to go back and shed the name, even though it wasn't going to be the same name as my children. They have a different last name than I do. But for me, as I walked out of that courtroom, a divorced woman, reverting back to my maiden name, it was so empowering for me because I had already established that name. I was Heather Sweeney in my career as a mom, as a single woman starting over. And it was just so empowering. And I felt like I was the woman that I wanted to be again. And also the woman finding myself and having the courage. I had the courage to start this career out of nowhere. And yes, I love my maiden name now.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
And what I love about the story, or even what I, so I'm gonna shift that. What is interesting about the story or poignant about the story is that during your marriage, you wanted to be associated with your husband. You wanted him to want you to share the name, and he rejected that option. But then when it was time to really separate and become divorced, he actually wanted you to keep it, which is so remarkable. And I don't know if that, like, subconsciously was a way he might have wanted to sort of erase your writing past so it would diminish your writing future, or I may be reading into it, but you became a very strong, independent woman during that second half of your marriage. So how that sort of influenced his dynamic, your dynamic, and your kids, which is another thing I wanted to raise with you.
Yeah, it was just, and at the time, and I still don't know his motivations, and we've never sat down and had a conversation about, the real reasons why he didn't want me to use my married name. And I think the irony also of some of this is that I think he saw me becoming more empowered, and I think that he likes that person. I think
Mm,
that maybe he saw me coming out of my shell, and becoming a stronger person, but in a way he also didn't want to be overshadowed,
right.
the way I was overshadowed. And so again, I can't speak for him or what his thoughts or his motivations, but it really, I guess the nail in the coffin was when I found out I had a piece in the print edition of Reader's Digest, and I was so excited. And our marriage was just about done. I think at that point we'd probably quit counseling, but I was so excited. And my mom and I went out. We bought every copy we could find in stores, and we had them laid out across the kitchen table. And he walked in from work, and he didn't look at him. He didn't open one. He didn't say congratulations, like, not even like a high five or good job or nothing.
Yeah.
And it was just, for me, that was just like, okay, this is the kind of person he does not want. He wants to be the person in the marriage who has the career and the recognition and the awards. And um, I don't know if that threatened him in some way. Again, I don't know what he was thinking, but it was for me like, okay, this is not an equal partnership. And I want to be with somebody who is going to be happy for
Yeah.
me, who is going to give me that hug and just genuinely say, this is the coolest thing, Heather.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
didn't get that. And it was important for me to finally see that and say,
Right.
this is, and it's never going to happen.
No, and it's hard to have that realization, but it was important because that was like the moment that you knew. Like you knew a long time before, but that moment sort of solidified it.
It really did.
And on that note, the beginning of your true independence, we need to take a short 30-second break to have a word from our sponsor. We'll be right back with our guest, author Heather Sweeney. And we're back with our guest, Heather Sweeney, author of Camouflage: How I Emerged from the Shadows of a Military Marriage. So we were talking about that moment that you realized for sure this was not a person who would ever be able to support you in the way that you needed. Um, but I want to jump back to a moment in our conversation where it was the first time that divorce was mentioned in your household. Um, you shared that it was on a really significant day, and you shared that um, you didn't have warning, but all of a sudden you realize that you weren't alone in feeling unhappy. And so that's significant. Um, but you also said today that you weren't, worried about how do I get this man back? You were worried about logistics, like where will I live? How will I support myself? What about the kids? And those are issues that every divorcing person thinks about. So, how did you, before you started working, how did you process that? And how can maybe my audience learn that in lots of different scenarios, we all worry and have the same concerns?
Yeah, it's such a common fear for women who are experiencing unhappiness in their marriages that, you know, if your husband is making more money than you don't have childcare, you can't find a job, all of these things, housing. Um, for me, it was such a deterrent to me being able to get out. And there was so I really did in the book I write about having divorce daydreams. I really did have these images in my head of packing up the kids and walking out the door and never coming back. And I just kept thinking, well, the only way I could possibly do that is to move in with my parents. And I didn't want to do that. And again, I was a stay at home mom, but I had a master's degree. And I just kept thinking, and for a while, that made me think everything was kind of on me to fix it. I thought, well, okay, well, I'm unhappy. Maybe it's me. Maybe I need to go back to work. Maybe, the kids just need to be a little bit older and more independent, and I'll find my footing. It's hard with young kids. And so when we moved from Japan to Virginia, that's another really big struggle for military spouses is finding a job and holding down a job because a lot of places don't want to hire military spouses when they know they're just going to leave in 2 to 3 years. And so I worked really hard to switch my teacher certification from Florida to Virginia. That took about a year. It took another 6 months for me to get a job. And as I'm interviewing, I could see the mental math of them saying, well, how long have you been here? A year and a half. When are you going to get orders again? Probably in another year and a half. And so I did end up getting a job teaching kindergarten. Um, and it was like I was talking about earlier, the little baby steps. And I
Mhm.
started feeling a little, okay, I've got a job. I'm starting to make my own money. It's not a lot. I don't have my own benefits, but it's a start. It's something that's going to close the gap that's on my resume from not
Mhm.
working for 6 years. And so little by little, I got a little bit braver and a little bit more confident in my ability to be independent. And then when I got the job at the website, pretty much writing the same things I was writing about on my blog. Okay, I'm making twice as much money now. I'm in contention for this promotion where I'm going to get benefits. And that was another big thing, health insurance. After I got divorced, I didn't have health insurance for 3 months. And I have chronic health issues, and had to start rationing my medication because I
Yeah.
just had no other way. And I had moved into an apartment as well. So I had to figure out I've got rent, I've got utilities, and I'd never lived on my own before. So that was a huge adjustment. But for me, it really was so important to figure these things out because I knew after all of the times we had talked about divorce, I think it was 7 times we had this big blowout divorce talk. I just couldn't keep living like that anymore. I couldn't keep saying, well, things will get better when the kids are older. Things will get better, when he gets a promotion and we're making a little bit more money. Things will get better when I get a promotion. I just couldn't keep living with those thoughts of saying,
Yeah.
well, I want to be happy now. Where's the happiness now?
Right.
And so, as hard as it was for me to try to figure out those logistics, I did. And I think I was so motivated by getting out of the marriage and finding happiness and starting a new life that it just kept propelling me forward and finding ways to take those baby steps
Right.
to be able to leave.
So what I hear you saying is that this is a process. Like we all have fears, and our fears are justified. They're rational. And yet we can do hard things. We can
Absolutely.
do really hard things because you said living alone, but you were living with your 2 kids, which is not exactly living alone. You were being a single mom and having responsibility for 2 other lives. And in some ways, it's a good thing that you had practice for all the times that he was away and you had to do it on your own. So it wasn't the first time you were trying to manage everything. Um, but at the same time, you had to be concerned with them. And that's really a big weight that we carry as single moms. How are we going to do all of it and grow our career? And, I also was astonished when you talked about training for races and marathons when you started running, which is, so empowering and being outside. But I know how much time it takes to train for a marathon because my ex-husband ran 3 New York City marathons, and
Wow.
when my children were very, very young.
Mhm.
And I supported him, but it was hard not having him for 3, 4 hours every day of the weekend for 3 months, It was challenging. Um, and you had the kids. So there was a lot that is part of how do we get this to work?
Absolutely. And um, again, I just found ways. The running really happened, the training for the Marine Corps Marathon. That was mostly because when the kids would go to his house on the weekends, I joined a run club. And it was really important for me to have goals. I'm very goal oriented. I used to be a competitive swimmer. So I've always been an athlete all my life. And for me, it was such a stress reliever to go out and just go run 15 miles or however much it was for the day. And I had a running partner that I ran with every Sunday because he was training for a marathon as well. But I will say, the military also throws a wrench into co parenting as well because I had this wonderful schedule, having the weekends without the kids. Although I wasn't used to being without the kids, I kind of felt like I was
Yeah.
missing a limb or something. But then my ex-husband got stationed in Hawaii for 3 years. Well, I'm in Virginia and I'm not moving to Hawaii. And so I ended up having the kids for the school year, and then they would go to Hawaii during the summer, which was, it was 10 weeks. I had never been apart from my kids for that long. But again, it was really important for me to try to find the positive in that. And so I kept running and I went to Turks and Caicos by myself.
Mhm.
But yes, single parenting is really, really hard. And I really did fall back on all of the things I did when he was in the military. I did a lot of parenting by myself. I was alone a lot. And I
Yeah.
really do think that the hardships of military life had trained me for everything that I was going through. I knew how to be lonely. I knew how to pack up and move. I knew how to be independent. So I really do feel like, in the end, maybe military life was preparing me for life after divorce.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that I noticed is, though, that you didn't just divorce a military husband, you divorced the whole life because once you're no longer married to someone in the military, as you described it, you're off the list. Like even the part of the list that's supposed to help spouses in divorce, you're off the list. And once you're off the list, you can't get that support. So it's really, we all talk about all the different, or I talk about the different divorces that we have. Like we have the emotional divorce, the legal divorce. Legal divorce is probably the easiest, but then there's a financial divorce. And then there's the social divorce because our friend group knows us as a couple, as a family. And when you're not in the military, I have all different friend groups and that's who I am, but that's also what my lifestyle was. So I could sort of lean on different groups. But as a military spouse, you're immersed in this military life. And so you really did need to start from scratch.
I did, and I will say the military spouse community is like no other. Very supportive. When we lived in Japan, it was a small community, and we helped raise each other's kids. We
Mhm.
co-opt babysitting, so we didn't have to pay for babysitters a lot. And when we moved to Virginia, I will say that you have to work to be involved. You can't just expect other people to come to you, and I really wasn't that involved in the military community that we had joined here. I really did kind of find my own people in a different direction. But I also had, military spouse friends move to Virginia from Japan. So
Yeah.
I did have that support. My military spouse friends were super supportive when I announced I was getting divorced. But yeah, it's really hard when you have to, kind of divide up your friend groups and kind of, everybody goes their separate ways. But the military community really is unlike any other. And so I'm very thankful to have really lifelong friends when it comes to that. But the lifestyle is very different. I didn't enjoy moving a lot, but I enjoyed seeing the world. How else
Yeah.
would I have lived in Japan? So that and having a baby overseas in Japan, that was a great experience. And it's odd for me. This is the longest I've ever lived in one place. I'm still in Virginia, and it's the longest my kids have been here most of their lives. And so they're very much detached from the military community as well. I'm not quite sure they consider themselves military brats, as they're called,
Right.
because
Right.
they really didn't have that experience of moving around a lot that they remember.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But they still have there are still probably pictures of them in Japan, like,
Oh,
so they
yeah.
know and they can tell people. I had a friend whose dad was not in the military, but for his PhD or something, he was in Japan when she was a baby, and she always talked about that was something that was part of her story.
It was
So,
wonderful. I hope to take the kids back one day and my daughter can see her birthplace. She was 9 months old when we left.
wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna end with the color red, because you're wearing red. The book cover is red, and I decided to join in the party and put on red as well.
Love it.
So tell me, like, what this color means to you.
Oh, it means so much. First of all, it's my favorite color, but more than that, um, when I was married, my husband chose everything as far as decor. I mean, well, a lot of things. He chose our vacations. He made a lot of the choices. And so when I was moving out into an apartment, so he stayed in our marital home, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to take, what I was going to leave. We agreed on everything because we had very different tastes. And I'm looking around the house and everything is navy blue and brown and gray and just so neutral. And that's so not my personality. And I decided that I was going to redecorate in red. I bought red plates, red towels, red bed sheets, red shower curtain. Everything I could find was just red. I think a red phone case, just everything I could find in red, because I really felt like it was just symbolize a spark and a sassiness and just an awakening kind of.
Yeah,
Just I didn't want to be these drab neutral colors anymore. I wanted to come out of my shell, and I'd always loved red and red nail polish, and it was very important to me. Oh, I love it. And so when it came time to design the cover of the book, and I was going back and forth with my publisher, and I didn't want camouflage to be on the cover. And I said, well, what about red? I have a whole chapter in the book about red. And that was it. And I had to have the red.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So when I think about red, I think about fire. And that led me, which is light and life. Fire is like that spark.
Mhm.
And that led me to Girl on Fire, which was Katniss Everdeen in
Uh,
the Hunger Games books.
mm.
And she was like remarkable with how she could survive and how she could thrive and just bring her light to everything. And that's you. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story. I encourage everyone out there to please go get the book. You can get it. Why don't you share all the different places you can get it?
Sure. If anyone wants to learn more about me, my website is heatherlsweeney.com, and Camouflage is available pretty much wherever books are sold. You can order it online. And if you prefer an audiobook, I narrated the audiobook
Mm.
myself. So go ahead and give that a listen. And I'm on all the social medias. Really, like seriously, I think I'm on them all. There are a million these days, but I think I'm most active on Instagram. So come find me at Writer Sweeney. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoys the book.
Great. Well, I know I did. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for being a guest. I hope you, my audience, really appreciated the power of this story. It's really amazing. And you can find me at Lisa at lzlcoaching.com. I'd love to talk to you. And you can always schedule a complimentary discovery call. And you can get that right off my website, lzlcoaching.com. With that, we will see you next time on the Divorce Clarity Studio. Bye.